It's innovation. So look, across the NHS, we will put patients in control of their care. And to meet that demand, we will also move care closer to their lives, shift treatment away from hospitals and centres and deliver more care at their GPs, in their community and in their homes. And you gave me some brilliant examples of what a difference that makes, shifting care towards people's communities and their homes this morning when we're walking through what you do right here. Because, as you know, that will make a massive difference to waiting times. If we can get more GPs consulting immediately with specialists, diagnosing even more quickly, then we'll avoid an extra 800,000 unnecessary referrals and appointments every single year. Another game changer, community diagnostic centres. We will open them, more of them, and it'll be 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. So if you need a scan or an X-ray, you get it done much more quickly and at your convenience. And that alone will deliver 440,000 extra tests and scans every year. We'll also let patients with long-term conditions monitor themselves at home, give them the technology to do that. And that will cut another 500,000 unnecessary appointments. We'll also reform funding incentives, focus our investment on what will actually cut waiting times. Far too much money is wasted on inefficient care. That has to stop because we can't afford it. Artificial intelligence will help us here as well. I've seen it in actions at a hospital I was at the tail end of last year. An AI-enhanced stethoscope that can tell in a heartbeat, literally, whether you're at risk of cardiac failure. And just think about that. That's a patient saved in an instant from a possible future that they may have had where they might collapse, possibly more than once, where they have to be rushed on trolleys into A&E, into acute services. All of that avoided because AI was able to pick it up much earlier. Think of the impact not just on the individual patient, the person that might happen to, and of course their family, but also on the NHS. Because artificial intelligence is a technology with almost unlimited power to cut waste, speed things up, and save lives. And with this plan, the NHS will harness it properly. And finally, to cut waiting times as dramatically as possible, our approach must be totally unburdened by dogma. Working people will expect nothing less. So today, I welcome a new agreement that will expand the relationship between the NHS and the private healthcare sector, make the spaces, the facilities and resources of private hospitals more readily available to the NHS. That's more beds, more operations, more care, available to the NHS, treating patients free at the point of use, targeted at where we need them most. A partnership in the national interest, cutting waiting times, working for you, delivering our plan for change. Now, I know some people won't like this, but I make no apologies. Change is urgent. I'm not interested in putting ideology before patients. And I'm not interested in moving at the pace of excuses. All through this project that we've been involved in, people have been saying to me, slow down. You can't change the Labour Party, they said. You won't win an election in every nation in Britain, they said. And they say you won't deliver on that plan. They'll say it again this year. I've no doubt about it, about this plan. It's that anthem of decline. But they've been wrong at every stage. And they'll be wrong again, because this year we will show that Britain can change our country. Politics can be a force for good, and we can unite the NHS behind a plan for reform. An NHS that's faster, easier and more convenient, with waiting times cut, patients in control, technology at your service, and outstanding care in your community. That is the change we will deliver. Another step along the road to a country and a people strong, secure, confident that the future will be better for their children. Thank you very much. Do you have a pen? Now, I am going to spend some time talking to all of you. That's what I'm going to do almost next. But before I do that, I'm just going to take some questions from the media. So if you'll forgive me, we'll deal with that, and then we'll spend more time talking through the brilliant work that you're doing here. But let me turn then to the media, if I may. I've got Hugh Pym, I think, from the BBC. Hugh.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. In opposition, Labour said it would hit more than one NHS target over the course of a parliament. Now you are focusing on one planned treatment. Where does that leave A&E? Is it being downplayed? And a second part to my question, if I may, do you have any reaction, Prime Minister, to a post by Elon Musk this morning suggesting that America should liberate Britain from a tyrannical government?
Let me deal with the health crunch, because it's really important. Look, we have got to get these waiting lists down. And we made a manifesto commitment to do so. And the important thing about the plan we've launched today is that it's the end of the 7.5 million on lists, on open pathways on the list, but it's also a plan that's been agreed by the NHS. So this is not talking about what we will do or what we can do. It's been talked through, agreed and signed off by the NHS. So this is an action plan for that. What I don't accept, that because we're doing that, then we can't do the other things we need to do on other standards. And I will never accept that prioritising waiting lists must come at the expense of the other things that the NHS must do, whether it's A&E, whether it's cancer and heart cases as well. So, you know, we can walk and chew gum here, and we're going to do that. The fact that we've got a plan in action today does not mean we're not going to do the other things. We will, of course, be publishing our 10-year plan for the NHS in due course. But thank you very much in relation to that. I don't really have any comment on the particular comment that was made this morning by Musk. Thank you. Can I come to you, Beth, please?
Thank you, Prime Minister. You just spoke, it's Beth Rigby, Sky News. You just spoke about private care going into the NHS. Some people watching might be worried about backdoor privatisation of the NHS. You talked about it being a partnership. Is this then a project that you will continue until you have cleared the backlog, or is this perhaps a permanent innovation? And on Elon Musk, I do need to ask you this. He called your safeguarding minister, Jess Phillips, an evil witch, a rape genocide apologist who should be put in jail. Does that sort of abuse of a minister make you feel angry? And what is your response to that? Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Let me address both of those. Firstly, look, an element of private sector support for the NHS has been there for a very, very long time. This is not new. And clearly we need to make best use of it. The agreement that we've signed today is to make sure we can do it better, so that it's not just the sort of cherry-picking of cases. It's a more comprehensive use, which will allow us to get the waiting lists down. Of course, the priority today is waiting lists, but I'm not ideological about this. Where there's capacity that can be used that will help us deliver in the NHS, then we will continue with that partnership. On the question of Elon Musk, look, I think most people are more interested in what's going to happen to the NHS, frankly, than what's happening on Twitter. But you asked me a really important question that's been in the news for the last few days. I am going to, with permission, just answer it quite fully, because it is a really important set of issues. And let me start with this. Child sexual exploitation is utterly sickening, utterly sickening. And for many, many years, too many victims have been completely let down by perverse ideas about community relations, or by the idea that institutions must be protected above all else. and they've not been listened to, and they've not been heard. And when I was chief prosecutor for 5 years, I tackled that head on because I could see what was happening. And that's why I reopened cases that had been closed and supposedly finished. I brought the first major prosecution of an Asian grooming gang. In the particular case, it was in Rochdale, but it was the first of its kind. There were many that then followed that format. I changed the whole prosecution approach because I wanted to challenge and did challenge the myths and stereotypes that were stopping those victims being heard. So we changed the entire approach, not without criticism at the time, I might add. And when I left office, we had the highest number of child sexual abuse cases being prosecuted on record. Now, that record is not secret. As a public servant, it's there for all of you or everybody to see. I also called for mandatory reporting of child sexual abuse. I called for that a decade ago. The Tories did nothing about that for those 10 long years, including when the J report came out nearly 3 years ago now. Central plank, mandatory reporting, still hasn't been done. We're going to do it. But let's just to bring it in closer, and I will answer you on Jess Phillips in particular, because those that are spreading lies and misinformation as far and as wide as possible, they're not interested in victims. They're interested in themselves. Those who are cheerleading Tommy Robinson, not interested in justice. They're supporting a man who went to prison for nearly collapsing a grooming case, a gang grooming case. These are people who are trying to get some kind of vicarious thrill from street violence that people like Tommy Robinson promote. And those attacking Jess Phillips, who I'm proud to call a colleague and a friend, not protecting victims. Jess Phillips has done 1,000 times more than they've even dreamt about when it comes to protecting victims of sexual abuse throughout her entire career. And so just as I took on the criminal justice system and the institutions when I was chief prosecutor, I'm prepared to call out this for what it is. We've seen this playbook many times, whipping up of intimidation and threats of violence, hoping that the media will amplify it. Now, Jess Phillips does not need me or anybody else to speak on her behalf. But when the poison of the far right leads to serious threats to Jess Phillips and others, then in my book, a line has been crossed. I enjoy the cut and thrust of politics, the robust debate that we must have, but that's got to be based on facts and truth, not on lies, not on those who are so desperate for attention that they're prepared to debase themselves and their country. So this government will get on with the job of protecting victims, including child sexual abuse, mandatory reporting, accelerating the processes. But what I won't tolerate is this discussion and debate based on lies without calling it out. What I won't tolerate is politicians jumping on the bandwagon simply to get attention when those politicians sat in government for 14 long years, tweeting, talking, but not doing anything about it. Now so desperate for attention that they're amplifying what the far right is saying. So that's what I say about Jess Phillips. Thank you. Robert, I've got next, from ITV.
Prime Minister, I've been speaking to NHS leaders over the weekend, and they are worried they don't have the capacity, the people, to deliver on your ambitious targets to reduce waiting lists. Will this new agreement with the private sector provide enough capacity, or will they have to recruit more people? And in the short term, will those people come from abroad? And forgive me for going back on Musk's attacks. You've described what he has been alleging as lies against Jess Phillips. This morning, he said you should be in prison. You're a lawyer. That sounds libelous. Will you take legal action against him?
On the question of staffing and resources, of course, there's always a challenge on staffing and resources, and that's why it's important that we've got the workplace plan coming on board for more resources and more staff, why we put the resource in at the budget. But let me be clear, the agreement with the private sector we signed this morning is not in some kind of substitution or as an alternative to the mainstream work with the NHS, of course. But through reform and efficiencies, we can make a material difference. It is worth, if you have time, I mean this in the proper sense, to talk to some of the staff here, because they've talked me through this morning some of the innovations that they've gone through that are cutting time the whole time. They're getting through many, many appointments here, the way they're processing the cases. This has all come from them. We asked them how these innovations come about, and they said it's our thinking about how we can improve the process. They're constantly doing that. So I don't sort of accept the basic argument that's put to me that you can only work at the pace we're working now, you'll never get more out of the staff and resources we've got. Actually, the staff here and in many, many other places across the country are very willing to look at ways of improving and changing the way they do things. And, of course, technology comes on top of that. Look, in relation to, I mean, I've said quite a lot about the various lies and misinformation that are put out there. My record is, it's open. I mean, there was nothing secret about being Director of Public Prosecutions. Every single case I prosecuted went to court and was looked at by a judge. I had an independent inspectorate, had access to every single file of every case any time he or she wanted, and I was overseen by the Attorney General, which for 3 of the 5 years was a Tory Attorney General. So that record, I mean, and so in a sense, rather than me trying to say any more about what I did when I was in office, you can access this material, you know where it is, you know what the facts are. But it is an important point that's more, the reason I've emphasised this today is because it's more, this isn't about whether I defend myself or my record, frankly. That record is there, you can see it, you can make your own mind up. It is something about the nature of our politics. Because once we lose the anchor that truth matters, in the robust debate we must have, then we're on a very slippery slope. And when politicians, and I mean politicians, who sat in government for many years, are casual about honesty, decency, truth, and the rule of law, calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right, then that affects politics, because a robust debate can only be based on the true facts. And that's why this is actually an important point about our politics, not about what anybody may or may not say on Twitter. That actually isn't the main issue. The main issue is what are politicians here doing to stand up for the things that matter to our democracy and the way that we have robust debate. That's why I want to call this out, because I think it really matters. And it matters not just to me, not just to the Labour Party, but it ought to matter, and it used to matter, to all political parties. And it's a sign of where the Tory party have got to, that we're even having this debate. Thank you very much, Robert. Can I go to, I've got Chris Hope.
Chris Hope, GB News. And I must ask also about the grooming gang scandal. Critics will say it's not a far-right bandwagon issue, Prime Minister. The ICSA report looked at just 6 towns where grooming gangs were operating. Rochdale got 1 mention in 400 pages. We have found at GB News court reports showing gangs operating in 50 towns across the country. Are you certain, as Prime Minister, it's not going on today? Why don't you order a national public inquiry to join the dots between 50 towns, not 6, barely mentioned in the J report? Are you afraid it might expose failings as your role as a DPP? And that's why Elon Musk says, were you complicit in the rape of Britain? You have not. To go after the far right on this does not go to the heart of the problem.
No. Look, Chris, look, on my record, I think you were actually covering crime when I was DPP. You were quizzing me at the time for The Telegraph as the crime correspondent, I think for the entire 5 years, if I'm right. And quite rightly, too. I'm not complaining in the slightest. But you looked at my record for 5 years with me as I was doing the job, facing your questions. You've got access to all of the material. So, in a sense, you can look at it. I've set out what I did. I actually changed the system because I could see some of the things that were going wrong. I wasn't prepared. Unlike some Tory politicians, I'm not tweeting about it or talking about it. I got on with changing it. In relation to the serious point you do make, because this is the victims here suffered terrible abuse, unthinkable, unspeakable, genuinely sickening abuse, and then they weren't listened to. That has to be taken seriously. We have to do everything we possibly can to make sure that never happens again. That's why I made the changes I did within criminal justice. Among the reasons I came into politics was because I felt that it couldn't all be done within the criminal justice sphere alone. It had to be done more broadly. On the question of this sort of call for an ever-increasing number of reviews, there have been a lot of reviews, including localised reviews. Including into Oldham, for example. The Mayor of Manchester did his review, and the J report was intended to look at the different types of exploitation that went on. It was a comprehensive review. What Professor J said was really important there, and because I completely agree, which is this doesn't need more consultation. It doesn't need more research. It just needs action. There have been many, many reviews, this constant asking for a further review. No stone should be left unturned. But frankly, it's time for action. Get on with it. Why didn't the last government implement the J requirements? You've got to answer that question. For 10 years we've had reviews and reports. Did they act? No. They're now tweeting and talking about what they think should have been done. I've got some pretty basic questions to answer in relation to that, in my view. Thank you very much, Chris. Let me go back to Kate from Times Radio.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Kate McCann at Times Radio. You've just said there that on a separate issue, we've had 10 years of reviews and commissions and looking at a question, and now is the time for action. In your speech just now, you said you don't believe in ducking reform, yet despite calling social care an urgent need in the general election campaign, you've just announced another review which won't report until 2028 fully. Will you bring that date forward now? And will you give those in the social care sector the protection from the national insurance increases while they wait for your report?
Well, I mean, firstly, thank you for raising this, because social care is such an important issue in its own right. And obviously, it's also linked to the question of what happens in our hospitals, because it's got a huge impact. And we've got to get it right, which is why we put Louise Casey in charge of this. He's renowned for getting to the bottom of things, coming out with really good, strong recommendations. And I want to build a consensus. I genuinely want a cross-party consensus, because if this is going to work and make a material difference, it's got to last through different parliaments. That will take time to get this right, but we're determined to do it. But we've also announced it will be in stages, because what I don't want to do is precisely what you're challenging me on, which is to say, well, we'll have to wait until the final outcome of Louise's report, which is why it'll be in 2 stages, with the first stage next year, which is what can we do now to improve the system as it is now. Now, some of that we've already started with fair pay agreements, etc., for staff. That really matters, by the way, because more staff leave social care to come to the NHS than to go anywhere else. And the reason they do that is because of the poor paying conditions and because there's no progression. And then they want to come to the NHS so they can progress their career. So some of it we've started. There'll be the interim or the first stage of the report next year, which means we can get on with some of the change that we need, because you're right, it's urgent. But it is right that we do it properly and take time and build the consensus that we need. Thank you very much. Well, I mean, the report is obviously going to look at what we can do next year. Let's see what the first stage brings with it. I've got Laura from the Telegraph.
Laura Donnelly from the Telegraph. Prime Minister, you've talked about reforming the NHS from top to bottom, but a number of the policies that you've outlined, the surgical hubs, the community diagnostic centres, and the expansion of use of the private sector, are familiar because they were introduced under the last government. I wanted to ask, what will be radical and reforming about the plan? And also, can you enlarge on what the new deal with the private sector is and what you think the chances of avoiding a winter crisis this time next year?
Yeah, well, let me take that head on. I mean, the first and obvious difference is The staff are now on the front line, not the picket line. And therefore, they're in the operating theatres getting on with the job that they want to do. That was an impasse we had for far too long under the last government. When it comes to things like diagnostic centres, we want to go further and faster, so have more of them and have them operating, as I said out a moment ago, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, making much more use of technology and AI. And the fact that within the first 6 months of a Labour government, you've got a signed agreement with the NHS about the change we need, that's a material difference. That's what you get by working together with partners to deliver in the national interest. I'm not here saying to the NHS, you must do this, please respond. I'm here saying, look, we've worked on this for 6 months, now it's signed, it's agreed, it's signed off, we're going to do this. So that is a material change in the whole way that we've come about reform, etc. On the private sector, we can give you more details afterwards, but the broad issue is really to make sure that the capacity we're able to use for the private sector is more comprehensive, is in areas which aren't necessarily usually covered by these agreements, which sometimes can be, the sort of easiest operations, if you like, put through the private sector. We want to broaden that to make better use of the capacity that is there. But we can provide you with more details of that, of the actual agreement afterwards. Thank you very much, Laura. Well, we're working at pace on this. We inherited a pretty broken NHS. I think if any of us, or if you across the country ask people, they would say we love the NHS. They've got brilliant staff, and they're absolutely right about that. But people know that it was broken by the last government, so we're working at pace to mend that. There will be pressures this year, of course there will. But the point of the 10-year plan, the point of the reform, the point of taking some of the pressure off through waiting lists is to make sure we can manage that crisis through this winter and alleviate as we go forward. But we inherited, as with so many other areas, we inherited a real mess from the last government. Thank you. I've got Max from the Times.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You say the sort of language Elon Musk uses matters to democracy here and has a serious negative impact on it. Musk is in a couple of weeks' time going to be a senior member of the US administration led by Donald Trump. So are you taking this as direct attack from his administration, and will you ask Trump to tone it down?
I'm actually making a more general point. I'm not going to individualise this to Elon Musk or anybody else. I'm making more because actually I'm very concerned about where the Tory party is going on this in this country, because they are not. I think only a few months ago it would have been unthinkable for things to have been said about Jess Phillips that were said recently, without all political parties and the leader of the opposition calling it out in terms. I genuinely believe that. I don't think it was that long ago that you would have all expected that reaction. You'd have all been challenging the leader of the opposition. Will you denounce this? This isn't fair, because it's put a member of Parliament, my member of Parliament, at risk. That's not good. That's why I say a line's been crossed. So this isn't about America or Musk. I'm talking about our politics. I'm talking about the responsibility that our politicians have in calling this out for what it is and distancing themselves and condemning it. Because if you're not prepared to stand up as a Tory MP and denounce what's been said about Jess Phillips, who's now had threats made to her, then you need to seriously consider why you're in politics in the first place, in my view. I've got Jack from The Sun.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Jack Elson from The Sun. You correctly identified that the J inquiry looked at the wider issue of child sexual abuse. But by refusing to hold a national inquiry that zeroes in on these rape gangs, can we take it that you are then satisfied that there are no more failings of wider states that need to come to light?
Well, I don't think we should leave any stone unturned, but I think we know what the basic failings were. The reason I brought the first massive prosecution for an Asian grooming gang is precisely because I could see that these warped ideas about community relations were possibly having an impact. Because I could precisely see that the myths and stereotypes about the victims were preventing some of the most vulnerable in our society from the protection they needed. And that's why we took that. That action was taken over a decade ago. Yes, of course, you're right to challenge and say, well, couldn't there be something else? But the basic problem here is pretty well known. It was pretty obvious. That's why I did what I did in the Crown Prosecution Service, because I could see what the problem was. And so there's always this sort of suggestion, let's have another review. I think Professor Jay, I mean, she did look at this for a very long time. You could sense a slight impatience on her behalf, which is say, look, just get on with the things that have already... There were, what is it, 20-something recommendations in the Jay report. None of them have been fully implemented yet. None of them were fully implemented by the last government. So for the Leader of the Opposition now to call for a further inquiry, but she didn't even implement the 20 recommendations of the Jay report, which is about as comprehensive as you could get, then I think that shows that perhaps where just the, trying to get noticed is becoming more important than the issue itself. So I don't duck your challenge, but I do genuinely say, for those that are really concerned about protecting these victims, and I really am, it's time to get on with it. Implement all the recommendations so far, and you'll make a material difference to the lives of very, very many victims. And that's why I think Professor Jay said, let's just get on with what we've got. And I think there's an element of truth in that. I'm not closing my mind. If you or others put specific allegations or issues to us, then we will faithfully deal with them, absolutely rightly. I'm absolutely not prepared to have this, pushed under the carpet. But I'm slightly impatient with people who just say, do another review, when they haven't got on with implementing the very many reviews. There's 7 pretty big reviews. There's then lots of localised reviews, no end of reviews. It's time for people to take the action. That's why I did what I did as DPP. That's why I'm going to do what I need to do as Prime Minister. Thank you, Jack. I got Claire from the Daily Mail.
Thank you, Sir Keir. You vowed to restore trust and integrity to politics. So do you think it's time that your anti-corruption Minister King comes clean about her use of homes linked to her aunt's regime? And do you have full confidence in her?
Troop Sadiq has acted entirely properly by referring herself to the independent advisor, as she's now done. And that's why we brought into being the new code. It's to allow ministers to ask the advisor to establish the facts. And yes, I've got confidence in her, and that's the process that will now be happening. Thank you very much. I've got Sophie from the Mirror.
Hi, Sophie Huskisson from the Daily Mirror. So you said about NHS staff being on the front line, not the picket line, but some unions have indicated that they could go on strike again this year after your government recommended a 2.8% pay rise for health workers. Are you worried this could put your plans and targets at risk? And a second quick one, if I may. We've heard horror story after horror story of cosmetic surgeries going wrong, not only abroad, but also here at home. Are you concerned about this, and will you commit to looking at the Mirror's campaign demands to take action here in the UK?
Look, on the question of pay, the first thing I would gently point out, particularly to the staff here, is we honoured the pay agreement last year, and quite rightly so, and I'm proud that we did that. So where we stand on proper pay for frontline NHS staff is clear from our record. Obviously, we'll have to go through the process for pay review. It's the usual process. But we will work with the unions, we'll work with the staff. The only reason we're able to hold up the agreement we've got today is because we've worked with the NHS on this, on what we can achieve together, and it's that approach that we'll take. On the cosmetic, I think you're running a campaign on this, and it is a really important issue, and I know Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, is looking at this, because clearly we need to look at what more can be done in some of those cases. So thank you for highlighting that. Thank you all very much, and now I'll do as I promised and get to speak to all the rest of you. Thank you very much. Thank you.